Here's a story that perfectly captures the dangerous intersection of politics, media, and corporate cowardice in today's America, and it's happening right under our noses. Michael Eisner, the entertainment industry titan who steered Disney through its golden era from 1984 to 2005, has just delivered a scathing rebuke that should make every American question what's really happening behind closed doors in corporate boardrooms. On Friday, Eisner took to X with a fiery condemnation of his former company's decision to indefinitely shelve Jimmy Kimmel Live, and his accusations are nothing short of explosive. According to the former Disney chief, federal authorities essentially strong-armed the entertainment giant into silencing one of late-night television's most prominent voices. Where has all the leadership gone? Eisner demanded in his social media post, painting a picture of institutional cowardice that should terrify anyone who values free expression. If not for university presidents, law firm managing partners, and corporate chief executives standing up against bullies, who then will step up for the First Amendment? But here's where it gets controversial, and where most mainstream coverage completely misses the bigger picture. The chain of events that led to this corporate capitulation reads like a textbook example of how modern censorship actually works. It wasn't a direct government order or an obvious violation of constitutional rights. Instead, it was a carefully orchestrated pressure campaign that began with a late-night comedy segment and ended with one of America's biggest media companies bowing to political intimidation. Let's break down exactly what happened, because the timeline reveals a troubling pattern that extends far beyond just one television show. On Monday evening, Jimmy Kimmel delivered his typical opening monologue, but this time he waded into dangerous waters. The ABC host made pointed comments about Tyler Robinson, the individual suspected of targeting conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Here's what sparked the firestorm. Kimmel strongly implied that Robinson was a MAGA supporter, painting the incident as another example of right-wing extremism. There's just one problem with that narrative, and this is the part most people miss entirely. Multiple reports had already established that Robinson actually held left-wing political views, directly contradicting Kimmel's on-air characterization. Whether this was intentional misdirection or simply poor research remains a matter of heated debate. But the impact was immediate and severe. Social media erupted with accusations of deliberate misinformation, and conservative voices demanded accountability. But what happened next transformed a typical late-night controversy into something far more sinister. Federal Communications Commission Chairman Brendan Carr stepped into the fray during an interview with conservative commentator Benny Johnson, and his words sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Carr didn't just criticize Kimmel's comments. He labeled them some of the sickest conduct and ominously suggested that the FCC had potential avenues to pursue accountability measures against ABC. Let that sink in for a moment. A federal regulatory official wielding enormous power over broadcast television essentially issued a thinly veiled threat against a major network because of a comedy show's political commentary. The response was swift and predictable. Nexstar Media Group and Sinclair Broadcast Group, which collectively operate hundreds of television stations across the country, immediately announced they would no longer air Kimmel's program on their ABC affiliates. Corporate executives, fearing regulatory retaliation, chose self-preservation over supporting free speech principles. Disney's subsequent decision to suspend Jimmy Kimmel Live indefinitely represented the final domino falling in what Eisner correctly identifies as a systematic intimidation campaign. The suspending indefinitely of Jimmy Kimmel immediately after the chairman of the FCC's aggressive yet hollow threatening of the Disney company is yet another example of out-of-control intimidation. Eisner declared, pulling no punches in his assessment of the situation. But Eisner's most pointed criticism came when he tackled the constitutional implications head-on. The former CEO suggested that current political dynamics essentially require rewriting the First Amendment to reflect reality. Maybe the Constitution should have said, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, except in one's political or financial self-interest. That's not just clever wordplay. It's a devastating indictment of how corporate America has abandoned its responsibility to protect democratic values when those values conflict with profit margins or regulatory relationships. Eisner even managed to work in what appeared to be a subtle jab at President Donald Trump, who had dismissed Kimmel as not a talented person during a press conference addressing the controversy. For the record, this ex-CEO finds Jimmy Kimmel very talented and funny, Eisner added, demonstrating that industry veterans aren't afraid to push back against political pressure. Liberal commentators and Hollywood insiders have rallied around Eisner's interpretation, arguing that Carr's statements constituted governmental overreach designed to intimidate media companies into self-censorship. They view this incident as part of a broader pattern of the current administration using regulatory threats to silence critical voices. But here's the million-dollar question that nobody seems willing to address directly. Is this really about protecting free speech, or is it about protecting the right to spread potentially misleading information without consequences? Kimmel's characterization of the suspected assassin appears to have been factually incorrect, regardless of his intentions. In an era where misinformation can literally cost lives and reshape political narratives, shouldn't there be some mechanism for accountability when major media figures get basic facts wrong? On the flip side, if federal regulators can effectively silence television hosts by making threatening statements in media interviews, what's to stop future administrations from using similar tactics against any content they find politically inconvenient? This controversy perfectly encapsulates the impossible tension between combating misinformation and preserving free expression, and neither side seems willing to acknowledge the legitimate concerns of the other. What makes Eisner's intervention particularly significant is his unique perspective as someone who navigated similar political pressures during his own tenure at Disney. He understands better than most how corporate leaders can rationalize censorship decisions as business necessities while ignoring their broader implications for democratic discourse. The fact that major broadcasting companies caved so quickly to regulatory pressure should concern Americans across the political spectrum. Today, it's a liberal comedian facing consequences for controversial statements. But tomorrow, it could be any media figure whose content challenges government preferences. Eisner's call for leadership resonates precisely because it highlights the vacuum of courage in corporate America. When entertainment executives prioritize regulatory relationships over editorial independence, they're essentially outsourcing their First Amendment responsibilities to political appointees. So here's what I want to know. Are we witnessing the emergence of a new form of censorship that operates through regulatory intimidation rather than direct government action? And more importantly, where do we draw the line between accountability for misinformation and protection of free expression? This story isn't really about Jimmy Kimmel or even about Disney's corporate decision-making. It's about whether American institutions still have the backbone to resist political pressure when defending unpopular speech becomes inconvenient or expensive. What do you think? Is Eisner right to frame this as a First Amendment crisis, or are there legitimate reasons why media companies should face consequences for spreading potentially harmful misinformation? Should federal regulators have any role in policing the accuracy of entertainment programming, or does that inevitably lead to political censorship? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, especially if you disagree with my analysis. These are exactly the kinds of conversations we need to be having as a society, even when they make us uncomfortable.